Welcome to DivCasts from the University of Chicago Divinity School. For more of our podcasts and information about our terms of use, please see our website, divinity.uchicago.edu/podcasts.
Good afternoon, everyone. I think we're about ready to get started. My name is Margaret M. Mitchell. I'm the Dean of the Divinity School and Professor of New Testament and Early Christian Literature. It is my deep pleasure to introduce our speaker for this afternoon, Professor Yoram Bilu, who serves as the Israel Studies Professor in the Divinity School for the 2011-2012 academic year. Let me say a few words about the Israel Studies program before I turn to the introduction of Professor Bilu. The past Israel Studies professors have been Professor Shimshon Zelniker and Galit Hassan-Rochem. This appointment represents the Divinity School's participation in an Illinois-wide initiative sponsored by the Jewish Federation of Metropolitan Chicago to promote the new field of Israel Studies. And representing the Federation here today is Mr. Michael Kotzen, whom I'd like to recognize and thank on behalf of the Divinity School. The institutions that are involved in the Israel Studies program include Northwestern University, the University of Illinois at Chicago, and the University of Illinois at Champaign-Urbana. We have committed to make 4 appointments over a roughly 4-year period with complete funding via the Federation's initiative. And then we're very excited that in the 5th and final year, the Divinity School will host a conference on Israel Studies built around the 4 scholars and their work. Each scholar teaches a course in the Divinity School with cross-listings as appropriate elsewhere in the university, and also delivers a public lecture, for which we are here today, that aims to engage audiences both within and outside of the university. Professor Bilu is an anthropologist who marshals the disciplines of psychology and history to study new religious movements in Israel. He is the author of 4 books, including most recently The Saints Empresarios, Dreamers, Healers, and Holy Men in Israel's Urban Periphery. He is also the author, in addition to other books, of approximately 100 articles on a very wide range of topics concerning new religious movements, and in particular their senses of space and of place in the very fraught political and religious entity that is contemporary Israel. Professor Bilu's work ranges from methodological discussions of the uses of psychiatry in analyzing this behavior to an examination of its politics, the medical health of participants, and the appropriations of ecstatic traditions in Judaism as warrants for existence. Professor Bilu's work displays a capacity to see the very broad forest of this complex phenomena, but also the details of the very many of its individual trees. The topic of his lecture this afternoon is Moroccan Jews and the Shaping of Israel's Sacred Geography. Please join me in welcoming Professor Yoram Bilu to the University of Chicago.
Thank you very much, Dean Mitchell, for your kind words and kind invitation to serve as the visiting professor for Israel Studies for this term, or part of the term. And I would like to thank also Rick Rosengarten, whose care and welcoming approach really enticed me to come after initial hesitations, which have nothing to do with these great universities, but stem from personal reasons. And I would like to also thank Paul Mendes-Flohr, who I suspect was the prime mover behind my arrival here. And not only that he contributed to my being here, but he also managed to arrange for me to see a game yesterday of the Chicago Bulls. Between 16 to 18, in my teenage kind of ancient period, I was a basketball player in a team league in Israel, in the youth league. Since then, I'm in a constant state of deterioration. These were my days of glory. I remained passionately attached to basketball. It's embodied, it's in my body, so this was a real gift on a par with the miracles of the saints I'm going to talk about later. You know, the series is sold out, and I managed to be there. Anyway, last but not least, I would like to thank Michael Kotzin. Thank you very much for your help and care and for the contribution of the Jewish Federation. In recent years, Israel has witnessed an astonishing revival of saint worship traditions. All-time saint sanctuaries are glowing with renewed popularity. New ones are being added to the native sacred geography. And the list of contemporary charismatic rabbis, acknowledged as tzaddikim, pious, holy men, and kdoshim, saintly figures, is constantly growing. The cult of the saints in contemporary Israel clearly exceeds narrow ethnic boundaries. But the imprint of the Jewish Moroccan legacy of saint veneration has been evident in many of its manifestations. Given the central role of Moroccan Jews in this revival, my aim in this presentation is threefold. First, I would like to situate Jewish Moroccan saint worship in the proper historical context, exploring its Maghrebi roots. Second, I seek to present and map its content manifestations in contemporary Israel. And third, I would like to account for the fact, and this is the more analytic aspect of my presentation, that these activities have been thriving in development towns, Arei Pituach in Hebrew, situated in the urban periphery of the country. So let's start with Maghrebi roots. The folk veneration of saints played a major role in the lives of many Jews in Morocco and constituted a basic component of their collective identity. In form, style, and prevalence, these cultural phenomena clearly bore the hallmarks of traditional Muslim saint worship, a striking feature of Moroccan Islam. At the same time, it was reinforced also by the deep-seated conception of the tzaddik, as Moroccan Jews would say, in classical Jewish sources, and particularly by its mystical elaboration in Kabbalah. The convergence of these two systems, the Jewish and the Muslim, created a particularly vibrant folk religious tradition. The Jewish saints were ordinarily depicted as charismatic rabbis, distinguished by their mystical erudition and piety, who possessed a special spiritual force akin to the Moroccan Muslim baraka, grace or charisma, or bracha, which is, the Jewish equivalent. This force, which does not fade away after the holy man's death, could be used for the aid and benefit of their adherents. In fact, most of the tzaddikim were acknowledged as possessing saintly features only after their death. Therefore, their miraculous feats were typically associated with their tombs, scattered all over Morocco, but most heavily concentrated in the southern regions of the country. The devotion of tzaddikim in the Maghreb was shaped in and further bolstered the strong mystical ambience. Unlike most other Jewish communities in which the supremacy of halacha, the rabbinical legal tradition, over mysticism was well established, in the Maghreb, these two systems reached a mutual accommodation. The prominence of mystical notions and practices found a spatial, from space, expression in the centrality of the cemetery, where venerated rabbis were buried as a communal focus alongside the synagogue, and a textual expression in the centrality of the mystical text of the Zohar, Book of Splendor or Radiance, vis-a-vis the Talmud. Indeed, the extent of popular reading and ritual use of the Zohar in the Jewish communities of southern Morocco had no parallel in the Jewish world elsewhere. The alleged author of the Zohar, Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, acronym Rashbi, a 2nd century Talmudic sage, became the bridge between saint worship and mysticism in the Maghreb. As the putative author of the canonical text of Kabbalah, Rabbi Shimon became the paradigmatic saint in the Jewish Moroccan pantheon of tzaddikim, an exemplary model of piety, esoteric erudition, and miracle making. The geographical dispersions of tombs and shrines of tzaddikim generally follow the map of the Jewish communities in Morocco in the pre-colonial era. But the massive Jewish migration from the hinterland to the urban centers following the establishment of French protectorate in 1912 has changed this map, leaving many popular holy sites, particularly in the mountainous south, in the Atlas Mountains and in the valleys, in areas where Jewish presence was substantially diminishing. No less than 652 saints and their shrines were identified. But this number is far from conclusive. Virtually every Jewish community, no matter how tiny or peripheral, had its own patron saint or saints buried in the local cemetery or in a more elaborate shrine outside. In terms of popularity and renown, most of the tzaddikim were of a local variety, but some have attained regional fame. While the wide geographical distribution of the Jewish communities and the unsafe travel conditions before pacification, French pacification, did not facilitate the emergence of national, all-Moroccan tzaddikim, in the decades before Moroccan independence, acquired 1956, the shrines of a small select group of saints acquired reputations and followings that transcended regional boundary, thus a national league of tzaddikim, if I followed my basketball experience yesterday, was established, but only recently, very recently. Some of the saints were well-known historical figures, while others were devoid of clear historical identification. The historical tzaddikim came from a variety of religious backgrounds, from a modest ritual slaughterer, shochet, or a teacher of the Torah in a tiny community who passed away just recently, to renowned sages and Kabbalists in times, founders and descendants of veritable dynasties of tzaddikim. Most well known among the holy families were those of Abu Hatzera, Pinto, and Ben Baruch HaKohen, names that are recurring in the Israeli chapter of Saint Veneration. Many of the non-historical tzaddikim were portrayed as rabbis from the Holy Land of Israel who had been sent to the Maghreb to collect funds, but met their death on the road before completing their mission, oftentimes in remote places. Dreams were the major avenue through which heretofore unknown saints made their burial sites known. Following the disclosure, a spate of miraculous episodes would facilitate the establishment of the new shrine. These episodes encompassed a wide variety of life problems, from severe illness to harassment by a Muslim adversary, all of which were resolved by the saints' intercession. This stereotypical life story of non-historical tzaddikim conveys the well-known tension between homeland and diaspora, an existential problem for Jews living outside the land of Israel. Perhaps less so for those in the diaspora of Chicago, I don't know. Like their followers, the saints had to leave the Holy Land. In some cases, their mission was explicitly presented as a forced exile. And like them, their wish to go back home did not materialize. The tension ended in a centrifugal twist. The frustration of the wish to go back to Zion, manifested in the saint's death on his way, has given rise to an alternative center. a holy place in the diaspora, a process which reflected and further reinforced the growing attachment of the Jewish communities to diasporic land. Following Aliyah, however, the origin of many Aliyah immigration to Israel, the origin of many tzaddikim in the land of Israel contributed to the efforts to re-establish their cult in the new land. For it seemed only natural, that is, culturally logical, that their wish was to follow their followers and return to the place where they had come from. The main event in the veneration of the saints was the collective pilgrimage to the tombs on the anniversary of their deaths and the celebration there. These activities were designated ziyara. This is the Arabic word for pilgrimage, visit, or hilula, an Aramaic term literally meaning wedding celebration. In this case, the matrimonial bonding between the saint's soul and the Shekhinah, the female counterpart of God. The saint's death anniversary was considered a particularly auspicious time for visiting the tomb and ask for his favor. When the time of death was not known, the pilgrimage would ordinarily be celebrated in the festival of Lag BaOmer, 33 days after Passover. The date of the great Ilula, Ilula Kbire in Arabic, of the prototypical tzaddik Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. In the case of the more renowned saints, many thousands of pilgrims from various regions would camp around the tomb for several days, during which they feasted on slaughtered cattle, drank mahya, the Moroccan word for arak, or alcoholic beverage, danced, chanted, prayed, and lighted candles. All these activities, combining marked spirituality and high ecstasy with flesh and blood concerns in a picnic-like atmosphere, this is the well-known spirit of the pilgrimage in many places, all these were considered devotional and conducted in honor of the tzaddik. In addition to the collective pilgrimages, visits to sanctuaries were also made on individual basis in times of plight, or with all sorts of life problems, or to fulfill a vow once a supplication had been granted. The presence of the saints was also strongly felt in daily routine. People would dream about them and cry out their names whenever facing a problem. At home, the evening lighting of candles for patron saints and the organization of festive meals, seudot, in their honor was a common occurrence, conducted usually by women, and it's an intriguing question which I will not discuss here, but we could discuss it later. To what extent saint worship in this context is a sort of a female religion. The birth of a male infant following the putative intercession of the tzaddik was a proper occasion for a seudah. And in this case, the saint's name would normally be conferred to the child. Thus, the presence of the saints was a basic given in the social reality of Moroccan Jews, a central idiom for articulating a wide range of experiences throughout the life course of the devotees. Some of them really conducted a sort of symbiotic relationship with the saint. Unlike the canonized system of sainthood in Catholicism, for example, Jewish and Muslim saint worship in the Maghreb were both instances of popular religion. As such, they were often criticized by Orthodox scholars in both groups as representing superstitious, if not near idolatrous, practices. The fervor and licentiousness often displayed at the apex of the celebrations were vehemently attacked by the ulama and the rabbis alike. It might be suggested, however, that this very tension between scholarly and folk traditions in the two religions and the lack of saintly canonization were conducive to sustaining the readiness of individuals in both groups to cross the line, to visit the shrines of the other side in times of need without a serious threat to their religious identity, integrity. The two systems were intertwined to the extent that Arab and Jews, Muslim and Jews, Arabs, Berbers and Jews often claimed the same holy man and made pilgrimages to the same grave sites. This is a scenario which in contemporary Israel seems entirely impossible, to put it mildly. Note that saint worship in Morocco was not a cultural fossil from a long-lost past, but rather a dynamic system accommodating to shifting circumstances in which new saints and shrines successively emerged, sank, and resurfaced. The early and mid-20th century, decades of rapid modernization, were the golden period of saint worship among Moroccan Jews. This is a modern phenomenon to the core. In fact, until the establishment of French rule, the tenor of Jewish Moroccan saint worship was personal and local. Prior to that period, the extreme poverty and the unsafe travel conditions in the rural hinterland, Bled as-Siba in Arabic, the country of strife and controversy, of conflict, powerless Jews could not walk there safely. And this made it highly improbable for the reputation and followings of a given tzaddik to transcend local boundaries. Following pacification, communication and locomotion between Jewish communities became easier, and the improved economic and political conditions facilitated organizational efforts to maintain and publicize many shrines on the communal level. The improved logistics and maintenance were bolstered by a growing psychological need. The rapid changes brought by modernization shattered the social fabric of traditional Jewish family and community. In this transitional process, many Jews who were grappling with the complexities and uncertainties of modern life without the dense protective network of kin and neighbors, while still attached to traditional values and symbols, fought disorientation and often other modern ills by turning to the traditional dispensers of solace and protection. Beyond serving as healing shrines, the emerging new centers had important social functions. The annual mass pilgrimages to the shrines in the hinterland brought to their communities of origin recently urbanized Jews from Marrakesh, Casablanca, and other urban centers. The Ilulot could be viewed as an open display of Jewish ethnic solidarity, but also by using a religious idiom which the Muslims shared and respected as a tacit claim to territorial rights where Jewish presence was rapidly dwindling, and in fact Jews all over Morocco were devoid of such rights, aside from tiny exceptions. So this was the first chapter, kind of exploring the historical context. Let's move now to the Israeli scene, and let's talk about migrant saints, Moroccan tzaddikim in Israel. The social fabric of Moroccan Jewry was further ruptured following the massive waves of immigration from Morocco to Israel during the 50s and 1950s and 60s. Until the Jewish exodus from the ex-Soviet Union, Moroccan Jews and their descendants had been the largest Jewish group in Israel as defined by country of origin. But their absorption in the new country was particularly problematic, and they soon became the emblematic carriers or representatives of what we call in Hebrew Abaya Adatit, the ethnic problem, which is related to intra-Jewish kind of communities. To the predicament of homecoming fed by culture shock and enormous economic difficulties, one could add a minor trauma, the disengagement from the saints whose tombs had been left behind. Indeed, in the first years after immigration, Jewish Moroccan Hilulot were celebrated, if at all, and we have some documentation, on a very local level, in small numbers, mostly at home or in the local ethnic-based synagogue. Once the newcomers became more rooted in the local scene and more confident in their Israeli identity, saint worship practices were forcefully revived as emblems of ethnic pride, compatible with the resurgence of ethnic sentiments in many immigrant absorbing countries. I don't know if St. Patrick's Day could be an awkward parallel. Anyway, the renaissance of Jewish Moroccan saint worship in the new country was made possible by the flexible employment of several compensatory substitutes for the shrines that had been left behind. The following 6 avenues depict the major undertaking through which Moroccan Jews have reshaped the sacred geography of Israel. The first avenue is adopting all-time native pilgrimage sites. Some of the holy places which dot the Israeli landscape are tombs ascribed to biblical figures, Talmudic sages, and mystical rabbis, around which pilgrimage traditions have been in existence at least since the early Middle Ages. It's interesting that the first millennium is entirely mute. We have no explicit documentation of saint worship among Jews. I don't think that it means that it didn't exist, but it means that the texts that survive, particularly the Talmud, reflected the elite kind of critical view of these phenomenon. The first documentation comes from the beginning of the second millennium, when European Jews with kind of new sensibilities are joining or following the Crusades and kind of documenting this phenomenon. The most popular shrines in Israel have been the sanctuary of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, whom I mentioned before, in Meron, near Safed, and of Rabbi Meir Baal HaNes in Tiberias. Given the long-lasting popularity of Rabbi Shimon and Rabbi Meir's Hilulot, the easy accessibility of their sites, and the high esteem with which they had been held already in Morocco, particularly Rabbi Shimon, it should not come as a surprise that their shrines were the first to attract the newcomers. The massive presence of Maghrebi newcomers in these sites was noted already in the 1960s and has been growing in the following decades. I believe that now, in the 21st century, we are already beyond the zenith of this ethnic phenomenon. As a shrine of a national tzaddik, Rabbi Shimon's tomb draws a big multi-ethnic crowd, which amounts to 400,000 congregants. This means that 7 to 8% of the entire Jewish population is concentrated in this place. It makes Meron into one of the, largest pilgrimage centers in the world, relatively speaking. Moroccan Jews are well represented in this heterogeneous community of believers, and they imbue the pilgrimage with a distinctive Maghrebi style. Ken Brown, an anthropologist who did fieldwork among Jews and Muslims in Morocco, had made the following observation after a visit to the Meron Hilula in the end of the 1970s, and I quote, "The area around the shrine was filled with people who had camped there during the night. Most of them had set up tents and tables and chairs. They were eating, drinking, playing music, dancing, sleeping or wandering around, observing one another and the goods for sale that have been set up by hawkers. The crowd was decidedly Oriental." Oriental is not a term we use in Israel, particularly not after Edward Said's kind of use of the term, but it's also a geographical misnomer. I would like to alert you to the fact that Orientals are Mizrahim, those who came from the east, while Moroccan Jews are those who come from the Maghreb el-Aqsa, the far west. Marrakesh, note, is west of any European capital, including Copenhagen. Anyway, and so was the atmosphere, Oriental. The sounds of music and voices, a mixture of Arabic and Hebrew as pronounced by Oriental Jews, and the smells of food. The scene, says Brown, the scene bore a striking resemblance to the pilgrimage fairs celebrated in Morocco by Muslims and Jews alike. Impressed by the massive presence and intensive activity of the Ashkenazi ultra-Orthodox Hasidim in the central ritual zones in the shrine, Brown proposed the following interpretation of the Hilula. The pilgrimage, I quote, fair at Meron brought together Oriental and European Jews, but it did not integrate them, which is cogent. The separation existed here as it did in most sectors of life in Israel. The inequalities and imbalances should be noted. The ultra-Orthodox European Jews, a minority but nonetheless at the center, dominated the ritual aspect of the pilgrimage. The Oriental Jews, although a majority, remained on the periphery. Well, Brown's symbolic reading of the pilgrimage, although suggestive, appears overstated. The ultra-Orthodox Hasidim flocking to Rabbi Shimon's shrine can hardly be taken as representing the hegemonic Ashkenazi mainstream in Israel. In a few years they will, I'm afraid, but this is a different story. And the dispersal of Moroccan and other Mizrahi Jews in Meron's outlying mountain slopes seems to reflect a traditional pattern of camping and picnicking in the open rather than the oppressive domination of Ashkenazi ritual specialists. In this respect, it is illuminating to go to the other side and read the lamenting response of a religious Ashkenazi, a veteran member of the cult of Rabbi Shimon, to the changing face of the Hilula. Comparing contemporary Hilulot, that's the end of the 20th century, with the first one he attended as a child in the 30s, he bemoans again the Oriental takeover. And he asks, where are the dancers of that time? The joy, the exuberance, the ecstasy. An unrecognizable monster has emerged in their place, an Oriental fantasia. Like the Ziyara of Nebi Rubin or the Fantasia of Nebi Musa in the 20s. These are loaded comments because these ziyaras, these pilgrimages, are the major pilgrimages of the Palestinians in pre-state Israel, until 48, in fact. Okay, the second avenue is annexing pilgrimage tradition on a local or regional scale. Moroccan Jews living in development towns and moshavim, semi-co-op collective agricultural villages throughout the country, have adopted the burial sites of native tzaddikim in their vicinity and started to celebrate the Hilulot in the Maghrebi style. Although most of the pilgrimages thus created did not exceed local or regional boundaries, the resultant pattern of devotion seemed to follow more closely the Maghrebi tradition of a community with its own patron saint. The Hilula of Honi HaMe'agel, Honi the circle maker, a miracle worker of the Second Temple period in the northern town of Hatzor HaGlilit, is perhaps the most well-known among the regional community-based Hilulot. An old-time tradition located Honi's tomb in an ancient burial cave some 20 kilometers east of Safed. But the site was frequented only in times of drought, the termination of which was considered Honi's specialization. The term circle maker is related to this expertise. And Honi's presence became stronger after the development town of Hatzor HaGlilit had been founded by new immigrants, mostly from North Africa, near the cave. His popularity mounted in two peaks during the wars of 1967 and 1973, in both of which the town didn't suffer the slightest damage despite its proximity to the Syrian front. When the fighting subsided, some local inhabitants reported dreams in which the tzaddik appeared as the personal savior and the protector of the town. In some dreams, the bombs were deflected from Hatzor to Rosh Pina, which is a veteran Ashkenazi moshava, sort of belated revenge of the newcomers, the power of the oppressed. Anyway, these miraculous intercessions established Honi as the patron saint of Hatzor. Since Honi's glorious hour was associated with the patriotic theme of defending one's homeland, it was only natural that Yom HaAtzmaut, Israel's Day of Independence, which was celebrated last week, was selected as Honi's Hilula, and it's a fascinating example of the merging of traditional values and the kind of the contemporary realities in Israel. I would like you to note that the most frequent theme in saints' legends in Morocco was the savior, the saint's intercession on behalf of a Jew vis-a-vis a Muslim adversary. So these traditions could be moved very easily. In a similar vein, local cults have been formed around the tombs of Rabban Gamliel in Yavne, Rabbi Ishmael Kohen Gadol near Carmiel, and Rabbi Yehuda ben Baba near Kiryat Ata. More recently, the tomb of Rachel, not the matriarch, which is a famous saintly kind of sacred site, of course, but the pious wife of Rabbi Akiva, the 2nd century luminary and martyr, was rediscovered in the Muslim cemetery of Tiberias. In some places, a reappropriation of sites connected with the forebears of the tribes of Israel, Jacob's sons, but associated for years with Muslim saint worship, has been taking place. Examples are the sanctuaries of Dan near the town of Beit Shemesh, of Benjamin, east of Kfar Saba, and of Reuven near Ashdod. The third avenue is creating new contemporary saints. As I said, saint veneration in Morocco was a dynamic process with new tzaddikim entering the scene all the time. This process has been maintained and probably intensified in Israel as new sacred sites have been established around the tombs of contemporary rabbis with saintly status. The most celebrated of these is Rabbi Israel Abuchatzera, nicknamed Baba Sali, a pious Kabbalist and a worthy descendant of a saintly family in southern Morocco. Since his death in 1984, Baba Sali's tomb in the southern development town of Netivot has become a popular pilgrimage center, second only to Rabbi Shimon's sanctuary. What makes the festival in Netivot singularly impressive is the intense promotion campaign which Baba Sali's controversial son and inheritor, Baba Baruch, who served some time in prison, that's why he is controversial, but still he managed to become the heir of the successor of his father. So he initiated this promotion campaign characterized by media coverage, official invitations, special bus lines, organized markets, and governmental backing. The focus of the cult of Baba Sali is the spacious, whitewashed sanctuary and the adjacent, opulently decorated synagogue. This impressive edifice, visible from a distance, is now part of a larger walled enclosure that includes a parking lot, a picnic area, a restaurant, vendors' booth, and other facilities. In addition, Baba Sali's modest residence became the center of Kiryat Baba Sali's campus, a big religious campus which includes several buildings housing the headquarters of Baba Baruch's organization, a yeshiva, religious academy, a Talmud Torah, religious school, and a kindergarten. These were built in a distinctively ornamented Moorish style, sharply at odds with the plebeian neighborhood of this working class development town. The meteoric rise of Baba Sali Shrine as a national pilgrimage center, now, by the way, formally acknowledged by the Ministry of Religious Affairs in Israel, and also elaborated or cultivated as a national park by Keren Kayemet L'Israel, by Israel National Park. So this rise has drawn to Netivot other contenders for holiness who sought to bask in and even surpass the glory of the Abu Hatzera family. Most renowned among them is Rabbi Yaakov Ifargan, a young Kabbalist dubbed the Rentgen. And you have to know that Rentgen in Hebrew is synonymous with X-ray, so he is the X-ray. And the title was given to him for his piercing eyes and celebrated diagnostic skills. I follow the life of another contender called the CT from, like CT scan, from Beersheba. So it's interesting to see how they use these very sophisticated kind of medical terms to. Anyway. As against the traditional image of Baba Sali, very traditional, Baba Sali didn't make any compromise with the Israeli reality. In fact, he represented for the old generation those tzaddikim who had been left behind. So his image is traditional to the core, and then the modernist halo of Baba Baruch's undertaking, he was in politics, he is working like a politician. Ifargan appears as really a postmodern tzaddik, involved with media celebrities, leading politicians, and financial tycoons, and drawing to his nocturnal mystical rituals, rectifications, tikkunim in Hebrew, heterogeneous crowd that transcend ethnic, religious, and class boundaries. I once followed a bus tour to one of his nightly tikkunim with a group of high-tech kind of nerds from near Tel Aviv who were really enchanted by this immediate or instant mysticism. Perfecting the organizational and technological methods introduced by Baba Baruch, his bitter adversary, Ifargan was able to transform his late father into a hidden tzaddik, thus bolstering his exuding personal allure with the meta-historical depths of a lineage charisma. The father's impressive hyper-modern shrine facing the very traditional dome-shaped tomb of Baba Sali is joined by several minor shrines that punctuate now the municipal cemetery of Netivot. Another earlier case of contemporary sanctification concerns Rabbi Chaim Khoury, a leading Tunisian rabbi who emigrated to Israel in 1955 and died 2 years later in the southern town of Beersheba. The limited accessibility of the tomb, inconveniently located in the midst of the densely populated section in the municipal cemetery, does not stop the crowds from transforming the cemetery into a scene of joy and ecstasy on the Hilulah day. And again, being there on the Hilulah and seeing this exuberance, and then seeing a funeral coming in, people, crying their hearts. I mean, this encounter is mind-blowing. Unlike the more recent case of Baba Sali, the first phase in the emergence of Rabbi Chaim Khoury as the saint of Beersheba, there is a fascinating book by Alex Weingrod with this title, appeared spontaneous and unplanned, though it was later seized upon and monopolized by the Tzaddik's family. A third noted example among contemporary tzaddikim is the cult developed in the mid-80s around the sanctuary of Rabbi Moshe Pinto in Ashdod. The fourth avenue I would like to present is transferring Jewish Moroccan saints to Israel via dreams. This is the avenue on which I worked. Most of my work was conducted. Although the annexation of old-time pilgrimage sites and the creation of new sites have both contributed to the preservation of saint worship practices under changing conditions, the function should be seen as compensatory rather than restorative. Through these patterns, some local tombs, old as well as new, have become the focus of mass celebration. But the Jewish saints of the past still remained remote and until the early 80s practically inaccessible. To preserve the content rather than merely the form of Jewish Moroccan saint worship, a fourth, more straightforward, enduring accommodation had to be called for, namely the symbolic translocation of saints from Morocco to Israel. Here we deal with a seemingly spontaneous initiative of individuals inspired by a series of dreams in which the saint appeared and urged them to erect a site for him in their homes. These are domestic shrines, something that is quite foreign to Jewish tradition. Most of these saint impresarios, as I dubbed them following Peter Brown, were Moroccan-born men and women in their 40s who were coming from the rank and file. The most well-known Jewish Moroccan tzaddik to make aliyah via dreams, these are migrant saints, was Rabbi David U. Moshe, buried originally at least, in the Western High Atlas of Morocco. The sweeping success of the house of Rabbi David Moshe in Safed, erected in 1973, immediately after the war and clearly associated with the war and the aftermath of the 73 war, has made it an inspiring model for subsequent impresarios and their dream-based sanctuaries. Other transplanted tzaddikim include Rabbi Avraham Auriwar in Beit She'an, Rabbi Machluf Ben Yosef Abu Chatzera in Kiryat Gat, Rabbi David Ben Baruch from Tarudant in Or Akiva, and the cult of a female saint, Slat El Gtar from Tunisia, was recently resumed in Ramle. These names do not say much to non-Israeli audience, but I would like to alert you to the fact that all these places are peripheral or part of this development town map of the country. The fifth avenue is related to situating local saints in new shrines via dreams. Another personal initiative of Moroccan-born men and women triggered by dreams was the discovery of sacred sites associated with local saintly traditions. The most ambitious, if not grandiose, project in this category is the Gate of Paradise, Pitcho Shel Gan Eden, a site in Beit She'an through which the legendary tradition in the Talmud, mentioned once, associating the town with the entrance to the Garden of Eden, was grounded in a local neighborhood. Elijah the prophet, the protagonist of the dream revelation that triggered the project, was declared the patron saint of the new site. Another ambitious undertaking involves a domestic abode for Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai in the desert town of Yerucham. Needless to say, these two new shrines cannot compete on a par with the pilgrimage centers of Elijah and Rabbi Shimon in Mount Carmel and Meron, respectively. But they could survive due to the non-exclusive nature of the saint's presence, or rather omnipresence. A more recent dream-based revelation concerns the burial site of Prophet Isaiah, discovered in Nachal Dishon, for the Israelis among us, in the Upper Galilee, in northern Israel. And the sixth and last avenue is transferring the remains of Jewish Moroccan saints for reburial in Israel. This could have been the first and foremost, kind of the most accessible trajectory, but it was not. It has been quite infrequent because of the general reluctance of the Moroccan authorities to approve such operations. The most well-known initiative in this category is that of Rabbi Chaim Pinto, the chief rabbi of the town of Kiryat Malachi, who managed in 1989 to smuggle from Morocco the remains of 4 saintly figures, 3 of whom were pious ancestors of his family. The fourth is debatable, but he tries to give the impression that this is no other than Rabbi Chaim Vital, the senior student of Luria, Rabbi Yitzhak Luria Ashkenazi, the founder of Lurianic Kabbalah, 16th century Lurianic Kabbalah. Note that since the early 1980s, Moroccan-born Israelis and their descendants have been allowed to visit their country of origin. Indeed, many of the current tours from Israel to Morocco include these shrines on their itineraries. Moroccan Jews are going to Morocco as half tourists, half pilgrims, and are special travel agencies that are working on this niche. But the visits to the Maghrebi sanctuaries are not common enough to compete with the Israeli alternatives. In addition, the notion of a patron saint bespeaks of a physical intimacy and easy accessibility associated with a strong sense of localism that remote shrine cannot provide. Let me tell you a brief anecdote, if you allow me. I need 10 more minutes. Is it okay? Do I test your limits? Okay, thank you. When I finished my fieldwork in the house of Rabbi David Moshe in Safed, I kind of debated with friends and myself, what gift should I give the impresario, the one who had these dreams? And a friend of mine, an anthropologist, Israeli anthropologist with American passport, who could visit Morocco, brought me wonderful pictures of the original site of Rabbi David Moshe in the Western Eye Atlas. I enlarged them, put them in very impressive frames, and I brought it to him. It was a terrible mistake. He wouldn't put them on, and he was he liked me, and he was a bit embarrassed. Whenever I came, he would say, I didn't have time yet, until I found that he put it in a locked room in the back of the house. And only then I understood it. What a foolish mistake I did. He's trying to replace this place, and I'm bringing the original. And so this was, one of these errors of a beginner anthropology in his fieldwork. But some years later, Israeli friends who visited the original tomb, original is in really quote unquote, because Rabbi David Moshe is one of these ahistorical tzaddikim. Anyway, they visited the very impressive complex in the Western Eye Atlas and found out a huge picture of the house of Rabbi David Moshe in Safed adorning the shrine. So simulacra and kind of hall of mirrors is really, but it indicates that the new house is on the map, on the holy map. Okay, to conclude, and I would like to discuss indeed the sanctification that occurs in development towns. In seeking to situate the renaissance of Maghrebi agiolatry in the wider context of contemporary Israeli society, the fact that most of the urban areas for this revival were development towns, Ayarot Pituach or Arei Pituach, appears highly significant. The peak of the population dispersion policy initiated by the Israeli government in the mid-50s coincided with the first massive waves of Aliyah from the Maghreb. Consequently, many Moroccan Jews found themselves relegated to these hastily built planted communities in the periphery of Israel where they were assigned pioneering roles, becoming reluctant pioneers. The title of another book by Alex Weinrod, Pioneering Roles which veteran Israelis were unwilling to assume. And indeed, this coupling of the timing of immigration from the Maghreb and the establishment of Ayarot Pituach is critically associated with what we call the ethnic problem and the problematic absorption of Moroccan Jews. As the largest ethnic group placed in development towns, their partaking of the Zionist dream was marred by the many ills of these disadvantaged communities. These ills included limited occupational opportunities due to an underdeveloped infrastructure and reliance on one type of industry based usually on manual, low-paying jobs, an almost total dependence on government services, a poor educational system, and a high rate of population turnover in which the more resourceful, upwardly mobile inhabitants left the towns while the poor and the less able tended to stay. Because of these chronic problems, the development towns were depicted derogatorily as residual communities or sinks for the less resourceful immigrants. Against this stigmatic image, the optimistic goal-directedness and grand vision of early statist Zionism, inscribed in the names of such development towns as Netivot, pathways would be a good translation, Ofakim, horizons, and Shderot, boulevards, may appear a little bit vain. Many of the socio-economic and political ills that characterized these towns in the 60s and the 70s still haunt them in the beginning of the 21st century. At the same time, however, the inhabitants who did stay in the towns, despite the social and economic difficulties, have slowly developed a genuine attachment to the locality. The growth of these natural sentiments of belongingness and rootedness in one's own community finds expression in and is further enhanced, I would say, by the appearance of the saints in these towns. This presence grants mythic dimensions to places that were without recognized and validated past, thus making them more integral part of Israel. The tzaddik endows the town with an aura of sanctity, and the resident sense of attachment is placed within a larger meaning-giving system based on the idioms encoded in their Maghrebi traditions. And I know that Marxists would harshly criticize this kind of symbolic reading, but I do believe that the economic problems in these towns are crucial. Still, I think that one cannot deny the fact that after third or fourth generation, these natural sentiments of localism do develop. And just to emphasize this point, I worked with 10 to 12 saint impresarios. 4 of them are very detailedly depicted in my book, The Saints Impresarios, 2 men and 2 women. In all these 4 cases, the trigger, the precipitating factors for the dreams, for the appearance of the saint, was a firm wish to leave the town, which was almost kind of realized until the saint appeared and forestalled it. In the gate of paradise, Pitcho Shel Gan Eden in Beit She'an, the first apparition occurred on Friday, while on the following Sunday, the track for taking the possessions of the family to a more central town was supposed to be coming. So we have a narrative here and kind of two or a two-tier narrative, in the sense that there is this kind of physical drama, the intercession of the saint, and the real drama on the ground, as Israelis tend to say. Let us focus once again on Netivot, the most impressive instance in this process. That it's a southern town not far from Beersheba, not far from Sderot, very close to the Gaza Strip, and involved in the problems there. The peripheral backward town became the sacred abode in life and death of Baba Sali, a mystical luminary and scion of a venerated family of tzaddikim. In fact, Tel Abu Orera, a mound, archaeological mound, not far from Netivot, identified with biblical Gerar, where Abraham used to kind of put his tent, or was associated with Baba Sali's story, claiming that Baba Sali and Abraham are mystically related. So the meta-historical depth here is of 4,000 years. So it gives an aura of holiness to the place. This acquired transcendence, if you will, skillfully propagated by Baba Baruch, Baba Sali's son, has generated, as I said, reverberations of holiness in the town, most impressively reflected in the ascent of this postmodern tzaddik, Rabbi Yaakov Ifargan, in the same place, and there are some others. The mushrooming of the sacred, this Europhany in Netivot, has led a renowned Israeli writer, Chaim Be'er, those who know him, to designate the town the Benares Varanasi of Israel. He said that mockingly. This deriding designation reflects the mixture of condescension, mild disdain, and pluralistic concern with which development towns were viewed by mainstream Israelis. But for many local denizens, the saints represent an urban transformation, which is congenial and welcome. Evaluating the changes in the town following the death and rapid sanctification of Baba Sali, one local inhabitant said in an interview, and he said it with a modicum of pride, a town that was outside of Israel's map is now not only on the map, thanks to Baba Sali, it's also above it. לא רק מחוץ למפה, אלא על המפה ומעל המפה in Hebrew. This process, whereby sacred cities are being added to the country's landscape, is strongly associated with the changing context of ethnic consciousness in Israel. The folk veneration of saints, along with the preservation or revival of other practices associated with Mizrahi Jews, like ethnic festivals and ethnic music, provided many Maghrebi Jews with a set of cultural means to deal with their situation. By discovering and establishing sacred sites associated with the saints, they express their integration into the Israeli society. In this sense, the Hilulot in various sites partake of the nature of ethnic renewal ceremonies. They reflect the growing confidence of an immigrant group in being part of the contemporary Israeli scene, while at the same time, one should notice that too, they indicate a strong sense of ethnic distinctiveness. A leading Israeli social scientist has designated the renaissance of Maghrebi-based saint worship in the new country as symbolic diasporization of Israel. Note, however, that in planting the cult of the saints in the contemporary scene, the tzaddikim are reconstituted in a life reality quite remote from traditional Morocco. Remember the Hilulah of Choni HaMe'agel on the Day of Independence. The return of the tzaddikim conveys the dynamic process in which traditional notions of saint worship are being accommodated to the changing cultural idioms and religious sensibilities in contemporary Israel. Whatever shape the cult of the saints is going to take in the future, it bespeaks through all of its manifestations of a new vision of peoplehood and society entirely at odds with the secular collectivist Zionist ethos that shaped Israeli society in its formative years. Thank you.
Thank you. We have time for questions about it.
Is there a bleeding of the forms of Moroccan pilgrimage and so forth into what goes on at Uman with the
Rabbi Nachman.
Rabbi Nachman?
Shall we collect the questions and then? Oh,
No.
okay. Yes, there is a clear association. I'm afraid that as an anthropologist, who is quite identified with this subject matter, that the glorious days of this Renaissance are over. We are, as I said, over the dead. I was in Baba Salih's around in his Ilula 2 years ago, and I was quite surprised to find out that many Hasidim, particularly Chabadniks, Chabad, Lubavitch Hasidic sect, one cannot, everyone knows Lubavitch, and Breslovers are there. Many of these Hasidim were of Mizrahi background. There's a lot of immigration into Breslov and Chabad. They are the only Ashkenazi-based East European in origin Hasidic groups that accommodate Mizrahi Jews without reservations. I would say that today Breslov is dominated by Mizrahi, and in Chabad it's about half or so, in Israel at least. That's the boundaries are quite permeable, and you will find many Mizrahim, therefore, in Uman. Rabbi Nachman became an Israeli cultural hero in the last years, as part of this renaissance of spirituality in the countries. And yes, it's part of the same tradition of saint worship. It's a fascinating topic. I cannot talk about it here. I'm discussing it in my class. The centrifugal and centripetal movements, Israelis from the diaspora coming to the Holy Land, on pilgrimage, think of Birthright, Taglit, this American project, which is quite successful, and Israelis going outside to look for alternative shrines. And here I would include, kind of very comprehensive view or broad view. I would include Israeli backpackers in India looking for spiritual ashrams. They are spiritual seekers, and some of them are finding Chabad houses as a Jewish house. That's one of the reasons.
Also Mezbich, I've seen.
Okay.
Mezbich as well, where the Baal
Right. No, maybe it's
You hinted that in Morocco there was a strong element of female religion to this spirituality. And that's what I was going to ask. Did that transfer into Israel? Because when you mentioned a lot of the shrines and the saints in Israel, that a lot of them are male. Then you mentioned one Tunisian woman, and you mentioned the impresarios.
Yeah, you see, this is the we don't have a symmetry. If you look at the side of the followers, you will find that females, even in Meron today, are clearly overrepresented. If you look at the pantheons, most of the saintly figures are males, even though we have something very few. Among the impresarios, there are females and males as well. Dreams are a very inclusive, I would say, psychocultural mechanism. It's not incidental that these very simple people coming from a very, plebeian background are relying on dreams as the mechanism, not only some Talmudic exegesis in order to legitimize the project. So yes, females are clearly overrepresented in most of these practices. These are, I think, the only, if you have a counterexample, I would like to hear it, but I think this is the only occasion for women to convey, to celebrate their spirituality on a par with men. In public arenas. Otherwise, in public ritual zones, women are excluded, are political ones. But here we don't have a text. It's a scripture-less kind of religiosity. It's based on faith and ecstasy and food and whatever. Women can compete. So.
But then how is this different from witchcraft? Like, where is the line? Where in Israel there is a kind of association of like Mizrahi women within this kind of Moroccan witchcraft.
It depends on, the moral or the ethical dimension of the agents, the supernatural agents that involve. If saint worship is legitimized. When I call it popular religion, I simplify it. The distinction between small and big traditions are not so clearly delineated. And so no woman who participates actively in saint worship, the cult of the saints would be labeled mashafah, whatever. But it's true that women are overrepresented in sorcery, witchcraft, and this stuff. This is another story.
I wanted to ask about miracles more. You mentioned on Honi the circle drawer, kinds of military rescue. But what about medical and what about healings vis-a-vis these saint shrines?
Right. Well, these centers are healing shrines. I mean, not unlike the classic kind of examples, Greek examples. And some of the dreams, not dreams, or very instrumental in Greece and in other civilizations. So people would come to Meron, for example, with the explicit wish to locate themselves as close as possible to the tomb and have a kind of a visitation dream which would be interpreted as an omen that yes, I will be healed. And sometimes the context of such that the saint appears and bestows his blessing or something. So yes, these places are considered healing shrines. One of the interesting differences between male and female saint impresarios, and it relates to your question as well, is the fact that the males are impresarios in the strict sense of the word. They act behind the scene. They build the facade, and people are coming there. Some of the sacredness of the place impinges them, but indirectly so. They are not considered saintly figures, and they don't exercise healing. All the women, all the female saint impresarios are healers, and they are using those shrines to legitimize, not just from your question, to gain respect and legitimacy because they are working under the aegis of Shimon or others.
May I just follow up? I'm sorry. That just on that, is there apparatus such as we have in the ancient world with the cult of Asclepius, for example, where people would leave behind a votive offering, sometimes of the body part in question, sometimes money, sometimes even texts, right. Little texts that name that I was healed of blindness, or anything like this?
No, but people, the same dynamics, I think, is evident in the wish of the people to be filled with the holiness or the healing kind of feature of the place by living something, but taking back water. Bottles of water would be put on the tomb, only, and they are charged with holiness, and they are considered holy waters. Or people would leave scarves on trees. This is a very common kind of but no, signs of gratitude, no crutches like in Europe, no. Not yet.
In America, in the Great Migration, whole towns of black people and families would move to specific other areas, Los Angeles, Detroit, Chicago, New York. Could you explain the reasons for the migration from America and how people migrated when they got to Israel, when they were broken up, and you said there were, what, 600 tombs? I mean, it's not like they brought Joseph's bones with them.
No, they didn't.
So how they decide who their second is going to be when they get to Israel?
Well, the patterns of migration, I don't know if I got that right. First of all, one has to remember that Jews, there were push and pull reasons, if you're interested in the motivation for this is part of the question. Jews were pulled by the Zionist ideas and the establishment of the state of Israel, and pushed by the impending Moroccan independence. So the critical period was 48 to 56. This is the margin, slim margin, in which most of the Jews have kind of made their mind to leave, and there was a clearly deterioration of Jewish-Muslim relations. They were quite peaceful in Morocco, but of course what happened in Palestine, Israel in 47, 48, and it seemed that in Morocco there were some mini pogroms, and so people decided to leave. Mostly because of their anxieties of the future, not of what happened. They were sure that, following independence, they will be harassed, persecuted, whatever. This did not happen. But the Jews decided to leave. Now, why did they leave to Israel? That's a legitimate question, because most Maghreb Jews, or Jews from Tunisia or Algeria, did not choose Israel as their and it's clearly correlated with the length of French colonial rule of North Africa. In Tunisia, where Jews were granted citizenship in the late 19th century, it seems like a miracle achieved by Jewish politicians in France, Crémier, Alliance, on the system. 90% of the Jews chose the other bank of the Mediterranean. And in Tunisia, it was, I think, 60 to 40. Morocco was taken by the French in 1912. In the 30s, they were still fighting to pacify the South. So French domination was very short-lived, and most of the Jewish remained what we call traditional, and they chose Zion. This meant that, the more French-oriented, the intelligentsia, the leadership moved to France, and this is another exacerbating factor. That's what sociologists say, that the leaders, potential leaders, the elite groups chose France or Canada. So this is the basic motivation. Now, they were dispersed whites, randomers. There was no, today, even from a postmodern, post-Zionist perspective, which is quite popular among Israeli ex-Zionist academics, it seems as it was, part of this repression of the Orientals on the part of Ashkenazim. Just to have the right perspective, we have to remember that the country more than doubled its population in 4 years, between 48 and 52. And the difficulties of the absorbers were really enormous. The country was still leaking, the blood after the most terrible war that Israel underwent, and I include the 73 war. 1% of the Jewish population passed away in the war. It's a lot. So there were good intentions. They did bring to some kind of hellish situation because they paved the way to a very traumatic situation, because these were the newcomers, the European Jews of which Zionism had built its ground vision perished in the Holocaust. These were the new Uyghurs. They had to be transformed into Holocaust, into communists. Israelis after the war were quite reluctant, so they were sent, to various places. Families found a way to reunite. It was not but still, it was random. It was quite traumatic for me. Yes.
Interesting comparative data, and I want to ask a question on saints and modernity. I believe it's correct that between 1978 and the early part of the 21st century, when John Paul II was Pope, more saints were canonized in the Catholic Church than in the entire previous history of the Catholic Church. So in a 25-year period, more than in 1750, 1800, 1900 years. And I guess what I'm interested in is whether you could see some kind of common mentality at work here vis-a-vis modernity. You said at one point in your talk that these acts are compensatory rather than restorative. And some people read the impetus in Catholicism over that quarter-century period as being precisely that, which is to say to recover something. Is it a valid comparison? And if it is,
I believe it is if you use modernity, grosso modo, as an intervening factor here, as the main. When we look at the pace of sanctification, and I guess you're the expert, not me, but the pace of sanctification in the Catholic Church, it changes dramatically against the changing political context. Sanctification is notoriously slow, 100 years. But look at the emergence of Lourdes or Fatima, and you cannot but associate it with the desperate war of the church against the kind of Republican sensibilities in France. So yes, I think and I believe that the same kind of deep structure lies in these cases, even though I don't think that there is explicit modeling, and the system is very good. One is to remember that the circum-Mediterranean, the Muslim, the Jewish, and the Christian, is the cradle of saint worship in all three religions. Even though the Pope is Pope.
I'm sorry to do this, but you separated out Morocco from the other Maghreb countries because of colonial rule and because of economic influences. But Yemen, which has a then similar socio-economic framework, I wanted to ask about how Yemen works with the sainthood, and especially when it comes to Israel, whether they become overlapping or co-influence because of similar sociological.
Well, it's true that Yemenites are considered by the Israeli nationalism as the emblematic, traditional, not unlike Moroccans coming from the Atlas Mountains, from the southern part of the country. But I think that the timing of immigration is crucial here. It's paradoxical that the earlier it came, the better it was, even though the country was impoverished. Iraqi Jews came in 1950, I think, 51, Yemenites even earlier. There were still resources, there were still empty houses. All these evacuated Palestinian neighborhoods were taken in the new countries. And when Morocco came later, the country fared a little bit better, but I think it was not to the benefit. So this is one reason. Second variable which is extremely important is numbers. Every Jews were smaller communities, and so Moroccans were almost 300,000 Jews in Morocco in 1950-51. This was by far the largest Jewish community in the Muslim world, and most of them made their way in Israel in the 56 and the 60s.
Please join me in thanking Professor Eden.
We thank you for listening to or viewing our podcast. For more information and for other podcasts, please see our website, divinity.uchicago.edu/podcasts. Copyright, the University of Chicago Divinity School.